Hey everyone, Andrew here, bringing you another video review, and today we're going to be doing Batman! Streets of Gotham, the House of Hush, which I'm just going to call House of Hush. Too long of a name. Take a look at this column cover right here. Now, House of Hush is the latest, and quite possibly the last story in the Hush arc. What is the Hush arc? Well, the Hush arc is something that I just made up, a term used to designate a series of stories that all deal with plot elements, character development, and just basic story elements, all stemming from the original Hush story in 2003. Why do I call it the Hush arc? Well, it's because Hush is the main villain in most of these stories, although he's not in every single trade or story that is released. There's many different elements that come out of this Hush arc. For example, the first and probably the most obvious is the evolution of Hush as a character, turning from a one-dimensional villain that's really was only used for one story into a villain that's found its own niche in the Batman rogue gallery, having his own position as a character that's an enemy of Bruce Wayne more than an enemy of Batman. We also get the evolution of Bruce's past, what he was like when he was a child, the evolution of his family, exactly how did his family get intertwined with the Kane family, the Elliott family, and also the Gotham underworld. We get to see a lot of development with Bruce's parents, which are characters that really don't get developed at all because, well, they are kind of dead. But we get that evolution too. And we also get the evolution of Catwoman and Batman's relationship. Although subtle, we get to see it grow from being a relationship between two people extremely attracted to each other that have a cat and mouse game, and to two lovers who desperately care for each other and really love each other, but just haven't had a chance to truly be with each other. There's many other elements thrown into this Hush arc that I call it. In addition to that, a lot of the stories in the Hush arc don't necessarily have Hush in it. A lot of stories like Private Casebook, which is a series of stories that Paul Dini did, deal with some of those elements and lead up into later Hush arc stories. So, with that said, seeing that this is the last Hush arc story, for now at least, per the relaunch happening in September, exactly how well does this hold up to the other stories? Because so far all the stories in the Hush arc have really been good stories of good development, and although Paul Dini hasn't been the only writer in them, he has been the majority writer, the individual who has really put in a lot of effort and put in the most amount of contribution to this Hush arc. How well does House of Hush fare? Does it do well, or does it fall apart? Well, let's get into the basic story itself. See, House of Hush starts off with a story that actually really doesn't have anything to do with the Hush arc. It has to do with the Carpenter. It's a really, F-list villain that was part of the Mad Hatter's group of henchmen. But the Carpenter is an individual that goes around and makes traps for bad guys. She works with the Broker, who, if you don't know who the Broker is, it's a really cool character that's introduced that gives hideouts or sells hideouts to villains. So the basic story is just her going around, working for the Broker, and helping out this new villain called the Director. It's a centered story around just her. Although Dick Grayson's Batman does show up from time to time, it's really just her story. However, it also introduces what could be possibly known as the main villain of this story. The main villain is an old gangster who has a vendetta against the Wayne family. See, this gangster was trying to gain control of several properties in Gotham. However, one of the properties had the clinic that is run by Leslie Tompkins. And the Wayne family, or, well, wasn't a family at the time, was getting in his way. Eventually, this individual goes to jail, and he is there for 30 plus years. He is released from jail, and although he's never met Bruce Wayne before, he wants to kill him. However, Bruce Wayne is not Bruce Wayne, technically. Actually, Bruce Wayne is Hush. Yes, Hush is still posing as the playboy Bruce Wayne, because this story takes place in between when Bruce Wayne is gone and when he actually returns. So you see a shift from Dick Grayson being Batman to Bruce Wayne being Batman. And Hush is in a very bad predicament, because he's being hunted down by this gangster who has a vendetta against a man he's never met, and apparently against the wrong man. In addition to that, a new villain shows up called Bedbug. Bedbug's a very interesting villain because if you are bitten by one of his bugs, you become one of his sleeper agents. You are under his mind control. So Batman is torn between several different bad guys. He's torn between Hush, this gangster who is released, and Bedbug. And while all this is going on, his joyful, passionate, and ever so beautiful reuniting with Catwoman happens. And she gets stuck in the mix too. So the question is this: will Batman be able to resolve all the problems that show up in this story? Or will some bad guys succeed, some bad guys fail, and will they be lost in the Wayne family? Let's get into the good, the bad, and whether or not you should get it. Good. Well, this is just a personal thing for me, but my favorite moment in this is when Bruce and Selina finally reunite for real. Not the insider thing, finally reunite, and it's a passionate thing because what happens is Harley's under control of the bedbug and she's going to go there to kill Selina, and Bruce swoops in and takes Harley out, and Selina thinks it's Dick, so she's talking to what she believes is Dick, and the whole entire time Bruce is saying, Selina, 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 it's me, and no other words had to be said, and they passionately embrace. And I do love that because right now it feels as though Paul Dini is the only person that really cares about the relationship between Catwoman and Bruce Wayne. I know Grant Morrison kind of divulges into it a little bit during the Batman Inc. material. However, he doesn't really go in depth to it as much as, say, Paul Dini does. There's small, subtle moments between Catwoman and Batman here, and the small, subtle moments are much welcome. What happens at this relaunch coming up in September is up in the air. It's said that a lot of the Batman continuity is going to stay intact. So with that said, I would like to see the Catwoman stuff with him stay intact. But I like the fact that Paul Dini continues to push this relationship. That is just a beautiful one. I also really love that the fact that he deals with the Bruce Wayne family, the Wayne family itself, the Elliott family, and the Kane family, establishing the mega powers family-wise in Gotham, past and present. You find out that there is more than just the Waynes as the powerful billionaire family. There's the Elliott family, who eventually has their fall from grace, and the Kane family, which is where Martha Wayne comes from, and also where the Batwoman character can come from, Kathy Kane or Kate Kane, or, well, actually, there's technically in continuity two Batwomans, the one that died back in the day and the current one. And I'm not exactly sure which one actually belongs to the Kane family. I believe it's the current one, but I could be wrong. Anyways, well, I hope it's the current one, because Batman had a pseudo-relationship with the old one, and that would be a little freaky between people that kind of technically are relatives in law. Anyways, moving on is I like the fact that Paul Dini deals with the story element and deals with a plot element that never really been dealt with before, and that is the past of the Waynes family and also the present, and how the Wayne family name is so important to Bruce and to Batman, even if it's not important to him himself. Even though he doesn't believe it's important other than being a way to finance him, it is important because there's a lot of baggage that comes from it. I also like how the bad guy in this, while it's still Hush, is actually also just a gangster too. There's just this old gangster who's, I'm sorry his name escapes me at this time, and he's this very simple criminal. He doesn't have superpowers, at least not right away. And he doesn't really have any special abilities. He's this old individual who's dying from cancer, who just wants to have that one last final hoorah and take out the family that put him into jail for 30 plus years. That is good, I like. I also like to see the evolution of Hush's character, and we actually take a step forward in the Hush arc, because if you look at the Hush arc for Hush himself, he's a character that starts off kind of one-dimensional. Then he evolves into a character that personally hates Bruce from what Bruce became, so much that he attacks Bruce at very personal angles. Most notably is Catwoman. Every story that Hush shows in, almost, with the exception of Hush Returns, Catwoman is always involved in some way. So he attacks Catwoman, the woman that Bruce loves. He also takes his Bruce face, and when Bruce leaves and is thrown through time, Hush takes up the position as the playboy Bruce Wayne. In this, we get a resolve to him looking like Bruce, because you can't really have Hush looking like Bruce walking around, and also, well, Bruce Wayne. So you need some resolve to that. But I like how the evolution of Hush turns from a character that was really just used for Jeff Loeb's story Hush and turned into a character that's really a personal enemy to Bruce Wayne. So I do like that. And on a side note, I also liked the Carpenter story. It's a character that I really didn't have too much interest in. I had very little exposure to. I mean, everyone had very little exposure to it. But only Paul Dini can make a character named the Carpenter seem interesting. And her story was actually pretty fun. It wasn't overly amazing, but it was fun. And that's all that really matters. There was also a few funny moments of this. My particular favorite funny moment is when everyone's possessed by the bed bug and robbing places, and you know, the Penguin is one of them, and he's like a zombie carrying stuff away, and Batman's looking through his binoculars or his camera, and he takes a picture and he goes, huh, one for the trophy room. That's just hilarious. Bad. Well, there is bad to this story. One is pacing. And this is something that you can say to all Paul Dini's Hush arc stories, is that the pacing is a little bad here. More or less because we're getting that switch between Dick and Bruce being Batman, and the two stories needing to mesh together well. The one thing I can say about Paul Dini's Hush arc stories, and this is just a term I give it, is that the fact that they always have to be sidelined by the bigger Batman stories by Grant Morrison, or by Tony Daniel, or by anyone else, Judd Winnick, who started up with Batman Robin again. Just in general, it seems to be always sidelined by those bigger stories that are going on. So there's a larger space in between them. Sometimes months, sometimes years. You look at it, between Hush and then Private Casebook, there's a good 4+ years. Then between Private Casebook and Heart of Hush, it's not that much time. But then you go from Heart of Hush into the Faces of Evil, and then you go into Streets of Gotham, and then you go into eventually this, and it's all kind of scatterplot. It's all kind of all over the place. It's sometimes a few days, sometimes it's a few months, sometimes it's a year between stories. So that's something just for the Hush arc in general, but for the actual story itself, it could have been a little bit better pace and a few more issues contributing to the actual story. I would have removed the Carpenter story and actually gave 2 more issues to divulge a bit more into the past and divulge a bit more into the relationship between Hush Bruce, Hush Catwoman, and Catwoman Bruce. It would have been nice to see some of those moments between those 3 characters, because there's very little involvement between Bruce and Hush in particular, and Catwoman and Bruce do have those nice subtle moments, but they're very little and very few and far between. There's only really 2 great moments there, and then Catwoman kind of has to go off and do her own thing. So that's one bad. Other bad is that although this does a nice job wrapping up the quote-unquote Hush arc, which, you know, Hush as a character can always be picked up again, and we can continue this quote-unquote Hush arc, it wasn't the best story, and it could have been done a little bit better, and it felt a little rushed towards the end. The resolve was good, but I would have handled it slightly differently. And I don't want to spoil anything for anyone out there. When it comes down to it, whether or not you should get it. Well, when you look at the Hush arc, which off the top of my head consists of stories like Hush, Private Casebook, Heart of Hush, the Faces of Evil stories, which I believe is in the Streets of Gotham, Leviathan, or Hush Money. Hush Money, Streets of Gotham, Leviathan, which deals slightly with this stuff, and then eventually Streets of Gotham, House of Hush. This is probably the weakest of the chain, the weakest link, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. I enjoyed myself reading this. I enjoyed myself going through this. I had fun. It was interesting, and it gripped me in. And although I make it seem like this isn't the best out of the bunch, it's still good. It's definitely a solid B- to B material. I do recommend picking it up. However, to those people that aren't necessarily as die-hard Batman fans as I am, I would wait a little, maybe till it's in trade, or you can just pick up the issues and it might be a little bit easier for them. The hardcover is $22, $22.99. That might be a little much for this story, but I enjoyed it. If you're a hardcore Batman fan, it's okay if you get the hardcover. But if you're a casual Batman fan, or if you just enjoy the Hush arc or Paul Dini's writing, I would wait till trade for this. It was still fun, but it could have been better. So with that said, I'm going to end this review here. This is Andrew saying, peace out for now.